Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Adult Forum. This is our second week in a series talking about the Poor People's Campaign. We are just about to kick off our third week in the campaign of 40 days of direct action, addressing racism and poverty and the war economy, ecological devastation, and our nation's distorted moral narratives. And so this morning, I thought we could take some time to reflect on what we mean when we talk about distorted moral narratives. In our church and in our country, we have moral narratives, right? So one of our moral narratives in the Episcopal Church is our baptismal covenant, that we will respect the dignity of every human being, that we will strive for justice and peace. Other Christian narratives, Christian moral narratives are love your neighbor as yourself, love God. And our country has moral narratives too. As part of the Poor People's Campaign, which the Episcopal Church is in partnership with, we are attempting to address the distorted moral narratives that we see in our country, talking about poor people, people of color, people affected by ecological devastation, and people affected by the war economy. I'm going to show just a couple of short videos, and we're going to talk a little bit about distorted moral narratives, and then I'm going to ask some folks in the room to share about distorted moral narratives that have impacted them personally, and then we'll open it up for conversation following that.
We live in a community and really in a nation where people are blamed for their own poverty. The most important thing that we can do is give people a sense of personal dignity.
So one of the distorted moral narratives that we see in our country is that poor people are lazy. And if poor people would just go out and find employment, that they would be able to get themselves out of poverty. In Arkansas, we know that minimum wage is $8.50, and a living wage, in order to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment, would be $14.26. So in order to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment, an Arkansan would need to work at minimum wage for 65 hours a week. So people live in poverty and are working very hard. The working poor are stuck in a system that they cannot escape.
How can we as a country have it where people are serving food to us daily, but they can't even afford to put food on their tables? That is immoral.
The shame of America is to have the highest gross national product in the world, but the highest disparity between the wealth and the poor. It's a shame.
Another distorted moral narrative that we see in our country is that we live in a democracy and that if you want something to change, you should get out and vote. The truth is that the right to vote is restricted and is preempted and nullified for many people in our country. We have voter ID laws, like the one that was just passed in Arkansas, which prohibit poor people, people who have committed felonies, people who cannot afford to own an ID, a form of ID, can't get to a place where they can purchase an ID. It keeps them from their constitutional right to vote. I'm going to pass the mic first to Darren to talk a little bit about distorted moral narratives, and then we'll go back to Richard and to Jen, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
Good morning. My name is Darren Phillips, and this has affected me personally. There was a time in my life when I thought, well, this doesn't affect me. I don't have the time for it, and, it's not my problem. But that changed quickly. I got sick. I've got diabetes and peripheral neuropathy, and then a bad back. And when I got sick, it had been a process, and I had lost my job. I had no health insurance, and I finally went to a doctor and found out. But then to try to get the medications, is almost impossible. You know, well, it's cost prohibitive. You can't do it. For 5 years, I tried to get disability. During that time, there were I take insulin. There were times that I would go a month or so at a time without insulin, and it would. I mean, you know, I've been to the doctor, but you know, been to the doctor in the ER, and they said, you know, you should be dead or in a coma. The medicine that I took, that I currently take for my neuropathy, I couldn't afford it, so I would lay at night and just scream with pain because it's a nerve damage, and it's just unbearable pain. You know, basically that went on for, well, until the Obamacare Act. You know, I didn't you know, I didn't go to the doctor. You know, if it wasn't for my family, I would have been homeless because I'd lost my home, and you know, with their help, I was able to sometimes have medicine, and I had a roof over my head, where a lot of people, you know, they don't have that option. When the Obamacare Act took effect, I was able to get insurance and was able to go and see a doctor as I needed to. I was able to get my medications, and was able to get some tests done to find out that the problems that I have in my back, which I have 4 bulging discs, and I couldn't figure out why my left side would stay numb and hurt. And I had 2 that were sitting on nerves that caused my left side just to go numb, and it's just unbearable pain. I have a deteriorating vertebrae, so you know that explains a lot of the pain that I was having. I look now, and it's frustrating at times because for people to sit here and look at me, you know, you think, well, there's nothing wrong with him. And there was a time in my life that I would have probably thought the same thing. But if you know, until you've been in someone's shoes, you know, you don't really want to judge because you don't know what they're going to. I've learned in my life that, you know, I've learned from what I've learned is you just smile, you know, no matter how bad the pain, you just smile, and if someone asks how you're doing, you're saying you're doing good. I have good days where I can get up and I can get around, but people don't see the days when it's all I can do from get from my bed to the couch, and that's where I stay. And I've become active in the Poor People's Campaign because a lot of this, it does affect me, and you know, you hear that the people that rely on the SNAP benefits, the disability, the housing assistance, they're lazy, they don't want to work. You know, I don't buy into that. You know, I would love to be able to get up and go to work 40 hours a week. I can't do it. Like I said, I do all I can do, but it's, you know, for me to think that I can get up and work 40 hours a week, I can't. And with the SSI disability, I'm limited because if I do try to if I did try to find something to do, they take it out of my benefits, you know, so basically I'm going to make the same amount of money. And then I worry, am I going to lose my health benefits? So a lot of the things that they're discussing now, you know, cutting they've already cut the SNAP benefits, you know, cutting Medicaid, cutting Social Security, you know, for people like me, basically that's our livelihood. I don't like it, but but that's my only, really that's the only choice I have in life. For me to work, $15 an hour would pay for my medications a month. And I see the disparity, because when I had a problem where I was having to pay for my medications, and a vial of insulin that when I first started taking insulin was $100. It's over $400 now, and I use a vial and a half a month. That's one type of insulin. The other is $200 a month, and I use about a vial of it. The medication I take for my legs, which is the only thing I've found that'll work for my neuropathy, it's over $400 a month. And then you put the other medication in, so you're talking $1,600 a month. That's just for medications. That's not counting going to any doctors or anything else. So the Poor People's Campaign is very important to me, because it made me think, I can sit back and do nothing, or I can stand up and make my voice heard. It's not going to change overnight, but I think that if enough people's voices are heard and enough is done, that things will change, because I know I'm not the only one in this situation. There are other people that deal with the same thing. And if I didn't have the benefits I have now, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be right here now standing to you, because I know that without, there are certain medications that I take that if I don't take them, I don't live. And to be classified as lazy and just not wanting to work, that really, it upsets me, because I'd worked all my life. And, I didn't ask to be put in this situation. I've realized it's a fact that I've got to accept, and I have to live with it and make the best of it that I can, and that I'm going to have to deal with the rest of my life. And and I feel like that in a country as wealthy as ours, that nobody should be put in a situation where where they have to choose having a roof over their head, or having medications, or not being able to have the medications they need, because I've been there not having the medications, and it's not a life. It's like I said, you lay there, and like I said, I prayed to die many a night, and it's I'm grateful, like I said, to be involved with this. I know that there are other people in this church that are involved, and like I said, I've been to Little Rock a couple of times. And we've gotten people's attention, and I think that's what it's going to take, is just enough people making their voices heard to make change come about. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Pass the mic to Richard here. You turn your chairs around, or look towards the back.
Thanks. Well, folks, we not only live in a democracy, we live in a duality. Duality is, there's an underlying unifying principle to everything, but many times we experience things as opposites, light and dark, good and evil and all that. And, there's that one point that was made at the beginning about, if you want to change things, just go out and vote. But it's also true that a lot of people can't vote. And so there's a real inequality about being able to participate in this society, and it's built into the fabric, our DNA, and the Constitution. Originally, only white males who owned property and were 25 and above could vote or serve on juries, hold office, participate in society. Everybody else was sidelined. And the paradoxical intervention here is when you're dealing with dualities, sometimes you have to deal with a paradox. So the paradox here is that you participate in society in order to deal with the inequality of social participation. And one of the false narratives that I'm very concerned about, that I hear about every day online and talking to people, is that both parties are equally bad. Now, there's more than two parties, but but let's forget that for a minute. We'll bracket that off. But both parties are equally bad, and there's a real false equivalence there. And I want to be plain that I really do believe in the separation of church and state. It's vital. It's very vital. And I don't want to sound like I'm endorsing one party over the other, but we do need to challenge this idea, this false equivalence, and let it guide us as we go out and engage socially and talk to people. One thing I've done this primary season, I went out, especially when there were contested races, like in, I think it was Arkansas Representative District 86. And then I found out I don't live in 86, but that's another thing. There were two really wonderful candidates, and I went out and I took the time to read up on both of them and had a chance to meet one in person and talk to them. And, I was kind of really pleased. That was a happy ending. But, a lot of times we don't have two wonderful candidates, and you really do have a choice as you talk to them. You find out, okay, this person's a little more in line with what I believe or what I want to see accomplished. And so there's that too. It's not just going to the voting place, but it's doing some legwork and getting a internet spade and digging up, some information. And so I just know one of those things to keep in mind.
Thank you. I want to clarify, just for the sake of clarifying, that the Poor People's Campaign is a nonpartisan organization, movement. What we're asking for is for those who do make decisions for us, for the people, that they take the concerns and the needs of poor people, of people of color, of people affected by ecological devastation, and of the military complex, that they take those concerns they keep those in mind as they make decisions that impact us.
Not sure where to start. My name is Jen Cole, part of the Poor People's Campaign, and I've been a part of St. Paul's for about 20 years. I became part of this mostly because my mom worked 3 jobs since I was 13 years old when I got my first job. She died in debt at 73 years of age. I'm in public housing because I'm disabled, and I worked until I couldn't work anymore. I became disabled when I began hemorrhaging from precancer, and I had no insurance. The church helped me find a doctor to take care of me after about a month of searching, and I was bleeding to death. It was a very traumatizing time for me and my family. That was when after that surgery, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I have a pre-existing heart condition that I was born with. I grow extra nerves in my heart that cause my heart to beat very rapidly. And so I've had a couple of heart surgeries on that. One was just 3 months ago. I grew a nerve in my heart. These are things that it's very hard to find a doctor that wants to stay with you, a cardiologist that wants to stay with you on that. It's not something they can make money on. So the system is very rough on that. We have cutbacks on our medical care on that all the time. I just got cut back on my food stamps to nothing. Public housing, I'm very grateful to have, but this is not a handout. It is something you pay 30% of your income, which is SSI. So I'd love to challenge most people to live on $770 a month, pay all of your medical bills, pay your 30% to public housing, try to get your food together, try to pay all of your bills, try to live without a vehicle. Most of us do. It is a challenge. It really is. I just had to, my vision became impaired with my last heart procedure. We're not exactly sure whether it was the high blood pressure or if it was an allergy I had to the anesthesia. I had an allergic reaction and almost died. So we, at that point, I had to go get my vision checked. It took me about 3 months to save up for the vision care, which is no longer covered by Medicare and Medicaid. That's $88. My glasses, well, all totaled, it came to $240, which I borrowed from a friend. I'll be paying that back the next 3 months. I am grateful to get all of that done. At the same point, that's, that is it food or is it medical care? This is something, I'm one of a million stories out there. It's, I know so many people with this, and most people have children to take care of. So it's a very hard generation. I feel like I should also speak. I just went to my council meeting for HUD housing. Since it's Memorial Day weekend, our veterans right now, just in Fayetteville in Washington County, right now there are 110 veterans on HUD housing waiting list in Washington County. There are absolutely all of those people that qualified for the 110. That means they have been homeless for 12 months. There's no housing for them. There's housing going up everywhere, but there's no housing for those people. We're in a crisis, but the war economy, which I'm referring to that, we're spending, our government is spending 53 cents on every tax dollar on the war economy, 15 cents to that tax dollar on things like housing, welfare, health care, food. So we need to change that. So standing up for things like the Poor People's Campaign is near and dear to my heart for so many reasons. We're a struggling nation. We're not looking for a handout, we're looking for a change. There's something has to change here. For our children's children, we need a better future.
So we're going to open it up for more input, more comments. I would just ask that you keep on the theme of distorted moral narratives.
Thank you. I'm a guest, and I'm very pleased to speak. The biggest distorted moral narrative that I see, especially in Arkansas, is those who want to protect unborn children but are not willing to educate them and feed them and house them and provide their medical care. That I do not understand the logic. Forgive me, I'm weak. I do not understand the logic. A woman who has had early childhood education is 40% less likely to have an unwanted pregnancy. But we can't afford that early childhood education.
To add to that, you say you're pro-life, then you don't have any problem turning over 14 or 1,500 kids to sex traffickers, human traffickers on the border. I hate to say it, but I'm getting too old to put on a cape and a cowl and go out at night fighting crime, so we're going to have to come up with something else. But another thing I wanted to bring up, when I'm from Austin, Texas, and I was living down there, and I was working with some homeless young people, and I wanted to help them out, and I was trying to think about it, and I got into the whole thing of, if they get a job, and I thought, the service industry, they're always hiring and looking for folks, so I set up a kind of an impromptu little coffee shop in front of our church on Sunday morning, And I had a couple of the young people come, and we would just distribute coffee for free. And the plan was they would work for a couple of months, 90 days, whatever, and I would give them a letter of referral so they could go out and get a job. And I stopped it after a few months because I came across more than one young person who was actually working and still living in the street. They worked in the high-end restaurants, and the higher the price is at the restaurant, the less they pay the workers. There's another NRA, the National Restaurant Association, and they've lobbied to exempt their workers from the minimum wage law. So you make like $2.35, $2.45, something like that, and you really live on tips. And I've had plenty of other friends besides these young people who worked as waiters, and tips are really feast or famine. And if it's a UT or I'm sure a UA football game, I mean, you make bank. You make enough to cover your rent for that month. But rent comes due every month. And so when you're having slow nights and people just don't have the money to leave a big tip, you're out on the street, and a lot of them were. And they would also stand out and ask for change. They're panhandling. And one of the really another distressing thing that I hear is that, really those panhandlers, they're making lots of money. Oh my gosh, they drive up in an expensive Cadillac SUV and they hide it around the corner and they put on dirty clothes and make themselves look dirty, and they go out and they hold up the sign and they're making, $60,000 a year or something. I am not kidding. If you haven't heard this, it's outrageous. And I'm just, I don't know what to make of it. Like I say, I'm getting too old to go out and fight crime at night. So we've got to come up with something else. And using logic, by the way, and reason, in your own personal experience doesn't seem to make a dent in some folks. They are going to believe it regardless of what you say, and I really don't know what to do.
Anyone else have anything they want to share about distorted moral narratives that they have come across or that concern them or that they have questions about?
I think this refers to the number you threw out about the children, and it was a headline this morning that it's illegal to come across our border, period, so you'll go to jail, but that it's okay to take children away from their families, to rip those children apart from families.
My question would be, the Poor People's Campaign, what kind of ideas and concepts do they have to overcome the mentality of the people in this country who think that's just the way it is, or those people deserve it, or they're, that there's nothing to do? What are the options?
So the campaign did a large audit of the United States and the state of poverty. And so part of the approach to that is uncovering some of the statistics and facts about the nature of poverty in the United States and what is actually going on, and naming that and saying this is not okay. That we are a country that says we care about the souls of people. We get hyper-focused on issues which are more surface level, and what we need to do is look deeper into the system and reclaim what it means to actually care for the souls of people. Does that answer your question? Okay. That's my mom, everybody. Any other thoughts or questions? Janet?
Address that too. Also on the national website is a list of demands. So there are ideas on there, and those are the things we're working for. We're working toward national health care for everybody. We're working to put the Voter Rights Act back in effect because that has disenfranchised so many people. There's pages of demands based on each pillar, based on systemic racism, based on systemic poverty. So if you have 30 minutes, I mean, it's worth your time to read some of that information and get involved in the campaign. in some way.
I just have a question. Where is the Poor People's Campaign meeting this Tuesday at 6 p.m.?
So we are meeting. So this week we moved in observance of Memorial Day, and so the rally shifts. We'll be here tonight at 5 p.m. for the mass meeting, where we learn more about the upcoming week's topic, which is militarization and the proliferation of gun violence. The rally moves off of Monday onto Tuesday. We'll meet on the steps of the state capitol, and unless it rains, we'll move inside to the rotunda, and we'll hear from speakers who are impacted by the topic for the week. And then we moved the Tuesday night event to Wednesday night. And then going forward, every Monday at the state capitol, every Tuesday night at Good Shepherd at 6:30, and every Sunday night here in this room, 5 o'clock.
Yeah, Pamela and I recently were introduced to this organization. It's a national organization called Compassion. And my question is they told us you could adopt a child, in poverty, and in a foreign country for $38 a month. And that would provide all their needs for 1 month, $38. What's wrong with this country? How can they do that in all these foreign countries, third world countries, and it takes us thousands of dollars to meet a monthly need?
I don't have an answer to your question, but I guess the response would be that to use that as a reflection about how we use our resources and about when we're giving to charitable causes, where's the most need and where can we impact our local community also?
Thank you. To the point of, for example, sir, your story about getting your medication, and for you, ma'am, getting your treatment, could I get a show of hands how many people are familiar with the online service of Patreon? No? You know what it is, right? It's a form of crowdfunding, say like a monthly subscription. Do you have a ballpark estimate of how many people attend this church? About four. All right, let's just say 400. So even half those people provided, say, between $1 and $5, say if you had your own personal Patreon, right? You had your own personal Patreon. That's like a monthly subscription. It doesn't take a whole lot of a little to make a lot, right? And the moral imperative part of this, I'm saying, if moral can be construed as the mode of action in the world, one of the things that I might suggest would be, rather than attempting to impose this burgeoning morality I'm feeling in this room on the government, the people pulling those levers, could we instead instantiate something more cultural, right? For example, like let's just get together and do it ourselves, kind of a collective-based donation for these various good causes, right? Because in my own research, it feels to me like government and changing those laws, the systemic part seems to produce unintended negative consequences. It's messy and it's slow and it's fraught with contention, and this seems to be a safer route that would produce the least amount of damage and would produce the most direct good for those people in need.
I'm not going to answer your question, but my response would be, how are we to know how many of the 475 people who come on Sunday are not themselves impacted by poverty? And myself personally, if I was asked to give to support someone else's health care on an ongoing basis, I wouldn't have enough to care for myself. And so I don't see that as a solution personally, speaking for myself, because I can barely help myself. And so how am I supposed to help other people with financial help, right? I can give time and I can give energy.
It's not either or, it's both and. You don't choose.
Can you speak into the mic? Sorry, there's.
Sorry. It's not either or. We need both charity and change our government. That's all.
I think one important thing is changing perceptions. Looking at one aspect of distorted moral narratives is systemic racism. And, you know, up till a few months ago, a guy like me, if you asked me, does racism still exist? I'd say, I'm not sure it does. I have black friends, there's a black president. But it turns out that racism exists because one group benefits at the price of another. And if you're in the group that's benefiting, you may not see it. If you ask a person of color, they'll tell you right away that it's difficult to get housing, financing, banking, health care, criminal justice, all those things. There is a discrimination present. And so becoming aware of the situation and learning that I'm benefiting from a situation that I wasn't aware of, that changes my perception of the situation, makes me compelled to do something about it. So I think bringing awareness to others about a situation they may not be seeing or may not want to see, I think that's the key to changing our moral narrative.
So I want to close our time together because I feel like there's a lot of weight in the room. I wanted to share with you a video of one of our speakers that we had with us on Monday at the state capitol. He serves a congregation in Fort Smith. His name is Jared. Can't remember his last name. But it's a little echoey because we were in the rotunda because it was raining. So you'll hear the sound reverberate, but you should be able to understand what he's saying. And he's speaking on our theme from this past week, which was linking systemic racism and poverty.
For God so loved the world that God came into the world to show us how to love our neighbors as ourselves, all of our neighbors. Yes. But especially our neighbors who have been pushed to the margins, the sick in need of health care, the immigrant in need of a home, the poor in need of a living wage, school children who just want to be safe and get a quality education, people of other faiths who hunger for respect, and people of color who thirst for their lives to matter. Offended by the unsettling force of this inclusive love that proclaimed good news to the poor and liberation to the oppressed, that affirmed the rights of women and welcomed the children, afraid of this radical love that had the audacity to stand for the liberty and the justice of all, the privileged powers that be plotted against it, arrested it, and crucified it. Yes. 3 days later, there were stories of a resurrection, a resurgence of this love, because that's the thing about this love. This love will not be defeated. No amount of obstruction or collusion can conquer this love. No amount of hush money can silence this love. There's not enough nails in Jerusalem, or bullets in Memphis, or lies in Washington that can assassinate this love. Yes. But the light of this love is such a threat to the systems that feed the darkness. The darkness will still try to find a way to overcome it. Discrimination will be legalized under the guise of religious freedom. Voter suppression will be carried out under the guise of preventing voter fraud. Racist voter ID laws, gerrymandering, and sick religion will be used to disengage and disenfranchise minorities. Yeah. People with different faiths and different ethnicities will be demonized and dehumanized by Caesar himself. More prisons will be built, new walls will be erected, families separated. However, yesterday, I went to church. I went to church and I heard some good news from the second chapter of the book of Acts. When the day of Pentecost had come, they all came together in one place. They all came together. Black, white, and brown, gay, transgender, and straight, Democrat, Republican, and independent, Muslim, Jew, and Christian, they came together. And there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they had gathered. I believe the sound sounded something like, forward together, not one step back. Divided tongues as a fire appeared among them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, of a love that was so inclusive, so radical, so audacious, that despite their different languages, when they spoke out together, they were heard with a miraculous clarity by all. But others sneered and said they're filled with new wine. They're a bunch of sore losers, entitled whiners. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. Men of Judea and all who live and work in Jerusalem and Little Rock and Washington, let this be known to you and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk as you suppose. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters will come together and proclaim prophetic justice. And your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams, even upon the poorest of the poor. Both men and women in those days I'll pour out my spirit, and they shall proclaim good news to the poor, and liberation to the oppressed. And I will show portents in the heavens above, and signs on the earth. In other words, God is saying, through these people, through a new unsettling force of inclusive love, I am going to change the world. All came upon everyone because of the many wonders and signs that were being done. The moral narrative changed. Walls came down. Chains were loose. A blessed community was formed. Racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, and xenophobia were relinquished. Voting rights restored. Fair living wages were paid. Unfair incarceration ceased. Affordable housing, health care, and education were available. All of creation was respected and protected. Clean water was consumed. Clean air was breathed. And liberty and justice came. And it came for all. Not just for one race, one faith, and one nation. It came for every nation under heaven. Truth came for all. Peace came for all. Mercy came for all. Hope came for all. Love came for all. Into the world's darkness, light came for all. And the darkness could not, cannot, and will not ever overcome it.
You get a sense of what happens when we go to the Capitol. As we hear from faith leaders, from people who are directly impacted by the systemic issues that we are addressing. You can see Suzanne right up there in the right-hand corner with her collar on, holding a sign. She spoke on our first week, and we expect to hear from other Episcopal leaders in the upcoming weeks. I invite you, we're going to wrap up for the day. You're welcome to stay and talk to the people at your table if you'd like to. But I invite you to leave here and reflect on what is your moral narrative? What moral narrative drives you? And how are you being called to claim that moral narrative in your life and in your community? So thank you for being here today. I invite you to come back at 5 o'clock to join us and hear from the Reverend Dr. Barber, who's the head of the campaign. If you've never heard him preach, you're missing out. And to join us at the Capitol in one of the upcoming weeks if you feel so moved. Otherwise, we'll see you back here next Sunday at 10 a.m.